So today's guest is Diane Koplewsky. Diane is the director of Sleepy Hollow Group, which is one of Northern Ireland's largest childcare companies. Diane, the Sleepy Hollow operate 19 locations around Northern Ireland, employing over 120 professionals. Sleepy Hollow was the winner of NI for Kids Awards in 2017, and they were also the runners-up in the Nursery World Awards in London in 2018. Dan will be in the new year. Will be giving a TED Talk at TedX Derry / Londonderry in January 2021. So Dan, thank you very much for coming on today.
No problem. My pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Dan, just to give everybody maybe just a wee bit of background. Could you start off with earlier on in your life, and where you started from, and how you eventually got into running a childcare company?
Yeah, well, do you know what? It wasn't a conventional route by any means. I grew up in Armagh, actually the youngest of 3 children. I'm the only one in our family to actually ever go to childcare. I had a childminder when I was young. And I actually had really fond memories. My mum was a nurse, and my older brother and sister were 8 and 10 years older than me. And believe it or not, back in that time, whenever women had children, they couldn't go back to work. So as soon as that changed, when I was born just in 1970, my mum went back to work. I went to childminder and really never knew any different. Was very, very happy. Went to school in Armagh. Didn't know what I was going to do with my life. My mum was a nurse. My sister was a school teacher, and I kind of thought I would go into education of some sort. But I did business as it was back O-levels back in the day, and I really loved that. And that's when I went on to study in university. I did business and finance, and as soon as I graduated, I went straight to work for Cleaver, Fulton Rankin Solicitors, which I loved. It was surrounding debt litigation, so not the happiest of outcomes for a lot of the people I was dealing with. A lot of people really falling on hard times, and at that time, you know, you're going back to 1991, and banks were just lending without almost doing any credit checks, and people were borrowing way beyond their means. I think, you know, even money laundering legislation, etc., come in after that. So it was a lot easier to get finance. So whilst I loved the job, you know, I dealt with a lot of other people's hardships. And while I was there, I did a postgrad and all, and I decided, look, because I'd done business, I couldn't qualify, I couldn't practice as a solicitor. So I went and did a postgrad in legal studies. And at that time, I thought, you know, do I love the business side of things, or do I love the legal end of it? Actually was quite repetitive and quite boring, especially in the debt and insolvency, etc. So I thought I'll go and do business, and Cleaver, Fulton Rankin were very gracious to me. They were great employers, and I learned a lot. In those days, it was a very old school firm, and when you wrote letters, it was signed off by a senior partner. You know, nothing ever went out without it almost being, you know, very, very rigorously checked. And it gave me actually a great start to my career. So I went on then actually into practice management. And when I did my MBA, it was just literally around the time Coopers & Lybrand and Price Waterhouse were merging. And they were looking for people to work in their insolvency branch. And I thought, look, I would dip back into there. I would made a move. I'd been there about 8 years, had my first child, and I went over. And again, he was in daycare from he was wee, and not a problem, not a bother. And went to PricewaterhouseCoopers, as I said, just following the merger. And it was a tricky place to be, you know, 2 big companies. It took a lot of time for that to embed in. But again, great practice, really enjoyed it. And went from there to Deloitte back into practice management because they were looking for a practice manager for their Belfast branch when they worked at Bedford Street. So it was kind of career progression all of the time and keeping my foot in both waters. And I fell pregnant with my second child. My youngest one was just in preschool again, no problem, daycare in Belfast, went in, came home. And my second son was born slightly prematurely and had breathing difficulties. And at that time, the job I entailed in Deloitte, I would have been in Glasgow almost every other week. My husband worked in the museum, really long hours. And crazily, just after my son was born, I thought, look, this isn't going to work. It's just not going to work, because he needed a lot of help with breathing and all of that. And I knew that it was asking a lot for the day nursery to put him in, and they may not have been able to do it. So on a whim, I saw a day nursery for sale in the Belfast Telegraph, and that's where it started, literally in 2001. My son, who was quite ill at 12 weeks, came to work with me, And my other son was in his preschool year at that stage. Didn't go to preschool, just stayed with us in our nursery. And that's really where Sleepy Hollow began. I hadn't a clue what I was doing. 35 children, 8 staff, and really a nursery that needed a lot of work done to it. And that's really a very long story about my early childhood up to what took me into childhood.
So when you took over this business, it was already running for a certain length of time, and then so you were coming in, meeting the staff. What was like? Did you have a plan going into that? Like when you once all the ink had dried, you signed over the business to yourself. Did you have a plan going in, or was it very much kind of I'll see how this runs and then go from there?
When I went in, I suppose, yes. I have to say, I saw this as a 4-year career plan, or career break. That was my next 4 years, and I always saw myself going back into working in the corporate side of things. So I went in really with a view of just managing and running this business and letting they were childcares at the time. We're now obviously call ourselves early educators because it's a lot more than childcare. And the first person actually who looked after my little son, who was only 12 weeks old, and she took so care of him really because of his breathing difficulties, etc., actually is now my co-director in the business. Right. So I really learned from my staff then. They were the people who really, I sat, and my office actually was right beside the preschool room. And when I was listening to the children, the staff and what they were doing with the children, I thought, you know what? These people are doing absolutely invaluable work. And I didn't realise as a parent, and actually having been in and out of daycare, I hadn't recognised the role that the people played in young children's lives, because I myself had just seen these people who had been looking after my kids as carers.
Yeah.
And that's really, my staff actually instilled the love of early childhood and childcare in me, really. They inspired me.
Yeah. Because I think I've 2 young boys myself, and you take them to one's in nursery at the moment, but you don't, I think we don't see what goes on inside. Just kind of take your child to the door, they're greeted, meted, and off to go. So I think that's always a side of, for a lot of parents, maybe we don't get to see and maybe don't appreciate as much of what goes on once you go to work. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say there's a lot of planning actually happens in daycare, actually as much as what happened in a school. So it's not just, I think parents think we come in when we sing and we play with sand and we read stories, but we're documenting all of the time, and we're documenting children's learning right from babies, and we're making sure they're meeting their milestones. And really, probably nurseries are only telling parents when they don't meet their milestones. Because once children go into formal education, of course, you have those very formal parent-teacher meetings, etc. But we're doing all of that behind the scenes and already building a portfolio of that child really from the day and hour they start nurseries.
Yeah. And once you took over the business, obviously your staff were obviously sharing how they do things. How much did, obviously I know when you develop a career, you're constantly learning. How long did it take you to kind of get to a stage where you're comfortable knowing the ins and outs of the business, or was that not an issue?
The running, the day-to-day of it was fine. All of, the looking after the staffing and whatever. But obviously when I came in, I wanted to learn all about child development. So I went on and at that time enrolled in Belfast College of Further and Higher Education. It was before the Met days. And did a level 3. And actually the lady who was my teacher at the time was a lady called Helen Minford, and she just inspired me so much. She's actually not recently retired from Belfast Met, and her daughter-in-law to be actually works for me now. So it's a real learning circle. Yeah. But she kind of instilled, and I think that's kind of as well as always taught me is the role and teachers and educators can give it no matter what age in life. At that stage, I was in my early 30s, having already, studied the master's level and going back in to do like a level 3, very entry level vocational training. I found that challenging. I found it very, very different from anything I'd done before. And she was really gracious and really understanding, but instilled in me to want to do better and want to learn more. So that's really where I started, my love of learning of all things early years, and we've done a lot of training and play work, and we started up our own training academy and written our own books, etc., and play work and early years. So yeah, that, I have to say, it was between my staff and the staff over at Belfast Met at the time.
Yeah, and obviously you let the business obviously continue one as it was. When did you start? Did you just start making gradual changes to the business, or did you after a while something just kind of clicked? You thought, I have a philosophy I want to kind of put into this business and change. Was there much course direction at all, or?
What really happened with the change of kind of going into the expansion, so we still always only have one day nursery or early childhood centres, we like to call it, and the rest of our settings are all school age childcare settings, because we found we had one small after schools room of 12 children, and we found really by the end of primary 1 or primary 2 we were taking the bus with the writing all up the side of it to the school to pick the children up, and they did not want to come back to nursery. So my eldest boy had started school in Belfast at the time. We'd lived in Belfast and the nursery was in Crumlin, so I commuted every day, but I wanted him to go to school, obviously in the school that was local to where we lived. And we picked a school which at that time did kind of extend it after. It was informal, it wasn't registered, but it did extend it kind of after schools, and it meant that really when I could leave work at 5 o'clock or my husband left work, he could still go and pick him up because it was all on site. And the kids there, I knew from going in to pick up, the kids were there, you know, P1 to P7, they were having a ball. They didn't want to go home when parents were picking them up. And I thought, what am I doing wrong in my nursery? You know, what am I doing that the kids really don't want to be coming on the bus, and they don't want to, you know, be coming into a small room. And I actually felt that we were offering a really, because we had a waiting list the length of our arm at that stage. I was 2 years into the business. I'm at a waiting list the length of our arm to get into our nursery. So, you know, from babies right up to preschool was full, but I had always availability in my after schools. So I asked the school that my son was in, could I go and have a look to see what they were doing? And I probably wish I hadn't, because I was a wee bit horrified. It was run every day by really different teachers, you know, and they were doing it with the goodness of their heart, don't get me wrong, and the children were safe, but it wasn't regulated in any other way. So it could have been students in one day running it, it could have been teacher, it was the librarian the odd time, the school secretary, it was whoever. People took their turn, and that was what was expected. And I thought, you know, if this was a registered facility, and at that time childcare vouchers were just introduced, parents could have saved a lot of money. So literally on a whim, I came back and said to the girl in the office, the girl who's now my colleague Bruna, I said to her, you know, I think we could do something here with schools, and we could set up like a social economy. At that time, we didn't realise it was a social economy, but we thought, you know, we could pay rent or a certain percentage of this income back into the schools and provide a service for parents. Because the story that I was having with challenges, you know, about getting affordable, accessible childcare, every single parent who was coming over our door in nursery was saying the same thing. So we sat with the three of us, my husband, my colleague Bruna and I sat with the yellow pages. It shows you how long ago it was. We sat with the yellow pages and just picked names out, you know, of all the schools in Belfast, and a couple of the schools, you know, bit the bullet and asked us in for a meeting. That's where it started.
Because I know, because obviously being a parent myself, and me and my wife kind of struggle with the whole childcare, and I know speaking to a few other parents that I know, that is one of the biggest hurdles is getting childcare that's affordable. And I know it can play a major barrier, especially in getting people back to work. Maybe especially the mothers after maternity leave, they're maybe eager to get back, but now they're kind of very restricted. Obviously, trying to balance looking after the children and then obviously the childcare. So obviously that your own experiences shaped your own philosophy to make sure that you from your own experience you thought, I want to make sure that this is different for other people. So then the business obviously is grew. You're in multiple locations now. How did that come back? Was that just like a natural evolution of the business, or did you at one point really go, I want to expand, I want to grow this model?
Well, it actually was one of the principals in the schools in which we operated. She just was really inspired by what we were doing, and she could see really it was having a great impact on our school. We started off in 2 schools. So we started off in Newton Breda Primary School, which is now closed. It, it it was a thriving school at the time, but numbers were dwindling over the years. And even on the day that it closed, we had 16 children every afternoon. But it was earmarked for closure. We were there for about 8 years. And then we were also in a school called Ballycarrickmaddy, which was a rural school between Lisburn and Londonderry. And it was the principal at the time in Ballycarrickmaddy who said, look, I want to share with our model, what we're doing with other principals. And Employers for Childcare at the time were holding a conference for school principals, and they asked the principal to come along and talk about her experience with extended schools. And she said, look, I'm only going to do this if you will allow me to bring Sleepy Hollow on board, because they're providing the extended schooling. So when I get up, it was the first time I'd spoken in such a large crowd. I think every primary school principal in Northern Ireland was there at that conference. And when they heard her speaking on what I had to say, literally, I mean, our phone was red hot for about 2 weeks afterwards. And you can only, it's the type of thing, you can't take on 11 of these at once. You need to go in for quality's sake. You need to go in, you need to make sure it's set up right. You're working alongside your managers, you're working. So we kind of grew maybe 1 or 2 a year, every year since, basically, and that's what's happened. This year, actually, just post-lockdown, we have 3 new schools opened this year, which is actually incredible, given, you know, that a lot of parents are still working at it from home, and some of those schools are absolutely thriving at the moment, because obviously there are a lot of parents back out in work. Whether they're working from home, they still need childcare, or they're out still working in jobs where they can't work from home at the minute.
I know this might sound like a stupid question. I'm watching people will obvious, Jonathan. How much of an impact has the whole pandemic had on your business, and how have you overcame that?
It was a huge challenge, I have to say, literally closing down overnight. And we would not have closed. I mean, our choice would have been to stay open for key work families, but our insurance would not cover us. So one of the huge things, you talked about the cost of childcare, and our cost. I remember having my very first meeting with a bank manager setting up a business loan, and he asked me to put through proposals, and he was giving me a kind of an indication, you know, that, you know, your staffing costs should be no more than 50% of your income. And when he looked at the ratio and the cost, and he went, well, you know, how come your staff costs take up about 85%? Well, between 80 and 85% of your income. So we're very staff heavy in childcare. But the other thing that is huge for us is insurance. Public and employer liability, and it's understandable because of the risks involved. Thankfully, which we have never had to use, but we couldn't operate without it. So all the insurers really across all the sectors, except for one across the UK where there was a glitch in the wording of the legislation, but there were very few in Northern Ireland who were insured with this one provider. So we had to close overnight. So I chair the Employers Forum in Northern Ireland for all daycare owners, after schools and childminders. So I was involved very quickly. I think the week following we closed, there was a COVID reference grouping set up with the Department of Health and several key employers. So we literally wrote over the case of maybe 2 weeks, a home-approved childcare scheme, which proved very, very effective. So it meant that staff that we had who were working for us were redeployed into our parents' homes. Now, at that time, we were only allowed to do it with the key worker families. But believe it or not, when we did stay open for a week or so after the announcement came to close, until such times as we couldn't stay open, the first parents to leave were the parents with the key work families, because they just knew the risk that maybe that could happen to them because their children were in group care. So that was great. It meant that our staff could go out and look after those children in their own homes. So they did that really for the whole month of April, May and June, and we reopened at the end of June and started to gradually reopen all our summer camps. And by the end of summer, we had 8 sites reopened, and by September, all of our sites reopened.
Excellent. That's great. And I say when I was preparing for this interview, you obviously have a approach, as you say. It's not just come in, sing nursery rhymes and play in the sand. You have actually set programs. Could you go into a bit more detail? There's one I seen which was quite interesting. I think it was from 0 to 5 year olds, and it was they follow their own on-cue curriculum, which is inspired by the Reggio Emilia approach. And I looked at the Reggio Emilia approach. It was inspired from work done in Italy, in an
Yeah.
Italian town, and they talk about children being able to express themselves in 100 languages. Could you go into a bit more detail about that and how you implement that into your own business?
Yeah, I mean, our nursery, actually, even in all of our after schools, are sometimes known as the nursery with no toys. We have no electronic equipment in any of our settings. And really, I suppose we were an All Ireland Centre of Excellence accredited setting, have been twice. We've gone through that twice, and it's kind of the highest accolade you can get in your sector. So it's a bit like an investorship in people, which we also hold, by the way, but it's a bit like that type of an accreditation, so that you come in and it's a renewable kind of kite mark for your industry. So we were always really what I would have termed a plastic fantastic nursery. You know, there was all the plastic toys and the very latest craze was in there, whatever the children were interested in. That was our approach really until about maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And I had the opportunity to go out to Reggio Emilia as part of a study group in Northern Ireland. And this was all new to us. So the town of Reggio Emilia, Northern Italy, quite an industrial area, and following the war there was a lot of decimation there. Following the war, a lot of the men lost in battle, and really it was a town that was really predominantly, you know, single mothers at the time post-war, and they set up this education system for their children. They knew that they had to do something for the children of the town, and the mayor at the time, Laurie Malaguzzi, and the local mayor both worked in the local town hall, and they helped these ladies, and again became educators by default, almost a bit like myself really. You know, they kind of come into education by default, and it's a town where the children are seen as the citizens of the here and now. I actually wrote something to the Belfast Chamber about this quite recently, because I could see how this model could easily be replicated in the likes of all of our towns in Northern Ireland, where really there is going to be an impact on the heart of towns if businesses don't reopen. And certainly without doubt there will be some element of flexible learning and hot seating in offices, etc. So we need to think about how we can adapt, and this model is just perfect. So the children are educated not just in their schools, but they're educated. They come into the town squares every week. You can see them moving into the churches. The children on a wet day are playing at the... So they bring their equipment and they go out and they learn in their towns, in their streets, in their villages, in their businesses. And it's a town where, say, a business, you know, maybe has, they keep all of their packaging. They would drop them off to the schools, and the children create. So everything will have a second and third purpose. So you wouldn't dream of throwing out a plastic box here. They wouldn't dream of throwing that out, that at all. They would see that as something that could be developed through something for the children. And it's amazing to go into those settings to see what those children do. And the key thing out of it is that children, the environment is their educator. So no matter where they are, they can learn from the environment they're in. So it's not necessarily that we're setting children down every 15 minutes and they move, you know, they're just getting into one activity and you move into the next activity. They do things called projects, and their projects can go on for years. And it develops really at the pace of the children. Now, they use some technology, but not the technology that we would use. You know, they would be using things like projectors to project things onto the walls. It's very hard for me without showing photos here, but I mean, we would be doing things like, if we were going out for a walk with the children, we would be bringing voice recorders with us. So we would maybe record just the sounds of the walk with the children, and we would come back and replay those sounds in the room, and the children then start to talk about their walk and they would experience it, and then there may be a craft activity come out of that, and that always kind of extends the children's learning. We might have taken some photographs on our walk and we would use a projector and project those onto the wall, so that the children then, you know, and it's just constantly just allowing the children to go at that next step and that next step and that next step. And really the key thing out of that, and I suppose as I've become an employer now and I'm 21 years in the business, and we see people coming back in who join us at 18, maybe as school leavers, and you realise how these people are so dependent on technology, and they're so dependent on being told what to do next. They're so risk adverse because they've never been exposed to risk. We as parents are constantly, cushioning our children, and we're not wanting them, be careful, you're going to fall, or watch out, or stop. We're really mindful of our language with children. So we would always, obviously, safety comes first, but we would always be very careful about explaining to a child what will happen. Instead of saying stop, or watch out, we would ask them, what do you think is going to happen if you did that? And the children, 99 times out of 100, will suddenly assess the risk themselves. And sometimes we'll say, well, look, how could we do it differently? So we wouldn't ask them, don't do that because. We would ask them, how could we do it differently? Would it mean that we need to bring a cushion over and set that down? Or do we need to move a bit of equipment out of the way? And the children now learn that for themselves. Yeah. It's the same as conflict resolution, the type of things that we would be doing for conflict resolution. So 2 children are playing over the box, and automatically my reaction 10 years ago would have been, well, look, we'll put the box away and we'll play with something else. So now we do something that's called conflict resolution. We get the children to talk about how are we going to, how are we both going to play with this box? Are we going to take turns? And again, that gives children negotiating skills going on. So it's amazing when you come into our nursery and you maybe see old cookers. They're actually, the children are playing with cookers outside, and old fridges and proper microwaves. We're allowing the children to play with proper equipment. We're not, you're not coming in to see big plastic equipment, because that's all that can ever be used for. We can only ever use that as a plastic cooker. I mean, it's amazing the things, if we give them the children the multiple uses. And that's really, to get back to your question, that's what Laurie Malaguzzi meant whenever he talked about the 100 languages of children. Yeah. It's not as in literary languages, it's as in the endless possibilities that we can offer our children by having this approach.
You often hear, and again, this came up on my radar there recently, there was somebody talking about back in, I think they were remembering their childhood, and they said back in the 70s, even I grew up in the 80s, you were able to, like, you left the house. If you were off school, you left the house, and there was no way for your mum to contact you. You went and explored. We used to go up to the Knocker Monument, and you'd be gone for a couple of hours, and then eventually you knew yourself roughly, I think it was more of a mental note, when roughly to go back home for dinner. Now obviously there's a lot more, we're more overprotective. Maybe I'm asking a difficult question here, but what do you think was the change in that? Why now are we, because times now are a lot more safer than what they were maybe 20, 30 years ago. Maybe I'm wrong in saying that. But what do you think is the shift? Why are we more overprotective of our children now compared to previous generations?
I'm not sure. I mean, as I said before, I grew up in Armagh in the 70s. I mean, a real kind of troublesome area, and I grew up, thankfully, in a very normal childhood. I walked home from school, and my parents, allowed that. They were both professionals, and I'm sure they assessed the risk themselves. But I think there was this, that was the norm for children back then. Now, and saying that, as you know, in Ireland, we have an awful lot of terrible history, with regards to children and historical abuse and things like that. And that, unfortunately, I think has totally turned a switch for us in Northern Ireland, where we've gone to the other extreme. That's hugely important, the stranger danger and all of that is, but in a safe environment such as ours, I think that's where it's important to allow children to express themselves and to follow their own routine, because I think this over-sheltering children can be adverse. I mean, a lot of the research that we look at play deprivation in early childhood, and a lot of the research is showing now is that has huge impact on the mental health of young adolescents. And I think in Northern Ireland, we really have to look at those statistics now and see, look, we need to invest in the early years, because that's the formative years. I mean, you've heard the saying, give me a child until they're 7 and I will show you the adult, and the man as it used to be. And that is really true. And I think if we could kind of go back to the very basics of early education, I'm not saying that technology is bad. I do think that, of course, there's a place for it. And many children will go on to careers that will involve technology. But I think if we could give the children the very core basic skills until they're maybe primary 1, primary 2, and then introduce technology, nothing makes me sadder than going into, any of our rooms. We used tablets, iPads in our rooms because we've got a software package that we use. And nothing makes me sadder than the children going over and knowing how to swipe that, and they're barely walking yet. So, children are being entertained. And going back to the towns in northern Italy, you would never see the children. And the children go out and eat meals with their parents all of the time. I mean, that's a huge culture in Italy. But you would never see a child going out sitting, on a tablet or an iPad or on a phone. Parents aren't engaging in conversation, but also there's that tolerance in the Italian culture that children can get up and leave the table and walk around the restaurant. People just want children to be children. Another thing that I think is probably at fault here is that children are timetabled to within an inch of their lives. As soon as they can join extracurricular activities, their diaries are as full as their parents' work diaries sometimes, that they're dropped off to one activity, they come home, they're dropped off to the next. And on a free day, you slot in a play date. I mean, when we were growing up, you didn't have a play date. You went round and you played in your friend's garden, or they came into your garden, and there was that freedom to do that. We didn't have to timetable that into children's lives. And I think that's where we need to get the step back in. We need to reclaim childhood for children.
You mentioned there about play deprivation. Just when watching, what I know it might sound like a super question to ask, but what is that, and how big an impact is it having now on today's kids?
Well, I think a lot of children, technology plays a huge part. I'm a parent of only boys. I just had boys in my household. And if I had allowed them to play in PlayStation, from an early age, they would have quite cheerfully come home and been stuck at that screen from coming home until bedtime. And, people think that the normal interaction is through, a headset, maybe on a PlayStation, or it's through, chats on, especially teenagers who use their phone all the time. And that's their element of communication. Kids need to hang out together. They need the company of other children. I think that isolation of children being cooped up in one space, in one room, and they're not playing. They don't know what it is to play. You could give children a load of equipment and they wouldn't know what to do with it. Outdoors for den building, for example, that should be innate for young children. Young children should automatically go over, and see that and think, gosh, I can build a den here. Quite often, if the technology isn't there, children are bored. And sometimes it's good for children to be bored. Sometimes children need to be bored to learn how to entertain themselves. And there are huge research studies. There's Professor Peter Gray in America is doing huge research studies in this, and he has said that play deprivation has huge adverse effects on young adolescents and boys in particular. And one of his solutions is to allow schools, or asking schools, he's doing a pilot in Boston, for children to be allowed just to play for 1 hour a day at the end of school. Not a competition, no competitive sports, not, there doesn't have to be a learning outcome, but just somewhere where children can chill. And the research out of that is that children have really enjoyed coming back into school again, because it's not all about the academia. It's not all about winning. It's just somewhere that they can chill and hang out. And again, no technology. Yeah. So I do think that's a really important part of childhood that, as I said earlier, we need to reclaim.
And if, again, say any parents, even like myself, how can we ensure that play deprivation isn't happening to your children? And what simple steps can we, as a parent at home, provide to make sure children are getting that essential play?
I think sometimes it could be as simple as, having times for the technology. It's very hard when you started with technology to remove it, and that can be seen as a punishment. And we're not all about reward charts or anything like that, But I think it's sometimes taking it away and giving children very basic things to play with that there's not necessarily. I'm not saying Lego's bad, because Lego's huge, but sometimes a box of Lego where they're not following a kit and they can be creative and build their own, using their own imagination. You'll remember back in the day, you just got a big Lego box for Christmas and you didn't really have to follow, and if a piece went missing, it wasn't crucial to your end product. If a piece goes missing now, and a wheel isn't there, well, do you know what? It's worthless to a child. Yeah. It's like giving a child a jigsaw or keeping a jigsaw in a room. That's the worst bugbear of mine. If I go into a room and there's, a jigsaw puzzle in the box with one piece missing. That's worthless to a child. So it's just sometimes letting children be. I'm not against, children going to sports or activities all of the time, but it's maybe thinking, how many of these do you need to be involved in? They don't have to do something 5 days a week. I worked with somebody and her child, my brother was a fantastic swimmer, and he swam for Ulster and he swam for Ireland. And he went swimming maybe twice a week, and if he was coming up to competition, he maybe had an extra session. And I see some of the young people now, and they're maybe getting up out of bed at 4:30, going swimming, and then getting a bus or train into school, doing a full day, and maybe going to training session again that night. Yeah. And now these are not, these are school swimmers. These are not future Olympians, and I'm thinking, really, what's your objective in that? Yeah. At what point is that child having to go to bed at 8 or 9 o'clock when they're teenagers? How much of that of their actual young adolescence or childhood are you depriving children by allowing it to get so extreme? And that's just one example of one sport, but I mean, it's anything. It can be gymnastics, it can be dance. Everything has become now in life all absorbing, and it's just getting almost. I think for children, it's almost getting out of control.
Yeah, and I think there's obviously, I know there's been a different alarm call. There's a documentary on Netflix at the moment that has been doing the rounds, is The Social Dilemma, but the impact of social media on obviously on younger children, and there's research showing really detrimental impacts. Are you like personally, obviously from running your business and looking at the bigger picture, are you concerned about the future of future generations, of how this is going to play out?
I think it's already happening. I think we're already in that stage, and it's going to be interesting now. My kids are one's just off to uni and one's past uni. They were just really pre the stage. It was way back Bebo, I think, was the first thing that kind of came in there. So they almost missed that generation of, still being able to go out and play mostly instead of being absorbed in. But I do think that this current generation of young adolescents, I think we're going to see the research and statistics coming out now about really what the impact that is. But as I said to you, I can see it in the young people who are coming out to work with us, who really, unless they have a timetable, or unless, it's very, very hard for these people to show initiative, because they have been following instructions, whether that's through gaming or whether that's through, if you go to post something on Instagram, like everything is perfect, and that is not real life. That is not real life. When you come into a room of 12 children, you need to be able to deal with situations in the here and now. You cannot put a screen on that, or improve the picture. You need, and that's what I'm trying to say is, look, and thankfully the children who come to our settings aren't exposed to any of this. And I can just see, that the kids who are with us and now want to stay with us until primary 7, and the kids who are coming and saying, the parents are saying, look, I can't get the children to leave at night, I do feel that we're making a slight impact, because those kids are just being allowed to play. We've written a book called The Accountable and Reflective Journal, and it talks about all the play types. And part of our evaluation every day is to look at all the play types and to make sure that staff are observing all the different play types that there are. There are 16 of those, and if they miss a play type, we're putting the props in there to make sure that they're getting such a wide range of play. And that might be mastery play or recapitulative play, where we're looking, where children are maybe something has happened to them, or they've been somewhere and they're coming back in and almost reenacting that. And yet a certain element of risk play as well, where we will let the children climb trees, and we will take them to streams, and we will go fishing, and we will go horseback riding. We take our young children, our preschool group, out to forest time every week. And that's the type of thing. Now, I'm not saying we're putting children at risk, but we're allowing them to engage in risk where they can eliminate the risk so that they can continue to play. So it's maybe taking them to the stream, and I mean the stream is ankle deep and no more. But if we were to go up the stream a little bit, it may be knee deep. So the children realise themselves, we can't go up there, and staff are supervising, but we're observing the children learning that risk for themselves. And I think that's really, we need to do a lot of more of that in our nursery schools and our primary schools to allow children to come into the secondary education when things start to get tough. When kids get into puberty and there's all that peer pressure from other people, that the children have learned the skills that will take them through that and beyond. Because that's how we grew up. I'm 50 this year, and that's how I grew up. I grew up with those skills, but children now, and again, the statistics in Northern Ireland speak for themselves. Sometimes children don't see any other way out whenever they're faced with difficulty, and we need to be investing in the early years and the early childhood to give those children skills, because quite often when children get into difficulties in adolescence, it's almost too late to help. We need to make sure that it is seen as a key focus, and this is why I'm passionate about talking about the nurseries and the work that we do, because a child's brain develops in the first 1,000 days. And that's from conception right through until they're 3. Children are going into formal education in Northern Ireland at age 3. Elsewhere in Europe, it's usually 7, which is giving, people like ourselves and parents or childminders or grandparents who are wonderful, because they set wonderful examples for the young children. But yet we're putting children into formal education at a very early age. So we need those first 1,000 days as early professionals, and that's why it will be my mission for the remainder of the years that I work in early years to advocate for our sector as early educators. We shouldn't be seen as childminders. We shouldn't actually even be called childminders, because we are providing education exactly the same way as university lecturers are.
Have you, as Stormont, listening, or have you been able to get much support from the folks in the Hill?
Yeah, actually, we've had a lot of support through lockdown, and I think really, if anything, if one valuable thing will come out of our sector in lockdown was a lot of the press publicity around parents not being able to access childcare. Childcare was a barrier in getting parents back into work, and we were seen as key contributors not only to working parents and children but also to the local economy. So we did get help. We got help from the First Minister, Deputy First Minister, and they set up a COVID reference grouping, which I told you about, and that actually meets now every week. And there is an all-party grouping in childcare. We actually had a meeting last week and the Minister was there, and he gave an hour of his time to question and answers, and there will be a childcare strategy introduced. We're the only one of the home nations, including Ireland, without any childcare strategy. And that we have had a promise from the Minister that will be introduced, and that will be to extend some element of free childcare so that all parents can access childcare, and to make it more affordable, because again, there has been no funding in our infrastructure, which makes it, quite often the parents who come into us, and we hear those parents and we take that back up to Stormont, they're paying childcare more than they're paying their mortgage, and that has to stop. But the cost of childcare is just humongous, and it's only increasing. So they do realise that now, and it will take a while. Now they reckon it could be a 3 to 5 year, lead-in time. We have been put slightly.
Hello.
Sorry, I'm back. You got me.
Yeah, you're good.
Can I just pick up where I went on? So there has been, there will be a lead-in time for 3 to 5 years. Before that's implemented, but it is in the pipeline, and that's the important thing. And they are listening to all sorts of employers. They're listening to Parents NI, they're listening to employers for childcare, the Northern Ireland Child Mining Association, all the right people around that table. And it's one of the few groupings that there are political representatives from every single party sitting around that table. So it's a key issue, for the politicians, and they are taking that on board, thankfully.
That's great to hear, and I think it's probably one thing that you probably get quite divided political parties to come together on, because everybody wants their children to do well and prosper. I was in a previous interview. I interviewed Gary Docherty. Gary set up the whole TED Talk for Derry, Londonderry. How did you end up getting involved in that? And obviously, I'm not asking you to give too much away. What's your talk going to be on childcare?
Yeah. Well, I worked with Gavin Wall for a while, and I went on one of his weekends, because at that time it was him who told me to write this book, and through that I got an introduction to Gary, and I actually sit with Gary on his board at Think Network, and I give a talk really about childcare with no toys, basically, was what my talk was about. But my talk the next time in the TED Talk is going to be play deprivation in early childhood and how we can turn that round. And think change really is obviously what his talk's about. But Gary is a phenomenal guy, you know, and I kind of talk to Gary at least once a week, and he's been brilliant, and he will be instrumental in actually taking Northern Ireland forward, I think, and getting lots of businesses. I mean, the people that I have met through Gary from all walks of life and all different careers, and we're all helping each other as owners, and that, you know, it's empowering and it's uplifting, and it's what we need at this time. We need to work together, you know, because our sectors, all of our sectors will have changed, no doubt, going forward. But, you know, maybe this is for the best. You know, I always think from a working parent's point of view, I'm hoping for our working parents that this will enable in future, you know, there to be a better work-life balance for our parents, you know, and that they will rethink, you know, how much they were so busy before, which also impacted in a busy home. And I think that will ultimately help children as well.
Yeah, because one of the things I realised, I have to say, thankfully due to lockdown, was being able to spend more time with my two boys, and even as I said, even just taking them to the beach, the local shoreline, letting them pick up crabs and things like that. It wasn't until that you were literally forced into this kind of break that you really realise how much time is spent literally running about, and how much time you miss out being obviously a father or a mother. And so I think from people I spoke to, it was the same kind of conclusion, that lockdown really changed their view on, as you were saying there, about their work and their life, and that balance, basically. So hopefully lessons will be learned and hopefully carried forward. What would be obviously I know your Sleepy Hollow's expanding to a couple other locations. I think Carrickfergus is one. So obviously is your long-term goal then obviously to pretty much be expanded nationwide? I think you opened one in the Republic of Ireland, or is that?
Yeah, we had been in talks, and you know, we were due to be opening in Dublin this year. That is the only unit that we haven't been able to progress with. But I think ultimately my aim now, and we've just started, actually, there's a group of 6 of us just started our early childhood degree, and my research on that is the emotional well-being on parents and children of on-site childcare. Because I do think that employers and again, why I wrote, you know, to the Belfast Chamber about how we're going to bring life back into our city. I think we can learn a lot by the Reggio Emilia model. I think, you know, that there should be in some of those empty retail units in the centre of Belfast or in the centre of any town, I think that there should be, you know, on-site childcare there for parents, that they can go to work, go and work in the shop next door, come and have lunch with their children, leave at 5, their child is with them, they're not rushing home through that terrible commute for an hour, you know, then having to rush, worry if they're there to collect the children up in time. The amount of learning, I was over at the London Early Years Foundation, and I went in to see the nursery set up, actually when we were over for the Nursery World Awards, and we were over again last year, and I contacted them to see if I could see what they were doing in the House of Commons. And it was amazing to see the parents there coming in and, you know, signing their children out for lunch and bringing them back in. They were able to spend their lunch hour with their children. And June O'Sullivan, who heads the London Early Years Foundations from Ireland, and she's a great wit, you know, she's a great crack. And she talked about, you know, the commute and children and the London transport, and how children were coming into the centre of London and going to art galleries and going to museums and taking trips around all. And I'm thinking, we could be doing this in Belfast. We could be going to the City Hall, we could be going to the Linen Hall Library, we could be going up to the museum, and children could be present in every part of every town the same way as they are in Reggio. And that's really my focus now, is to try and get some of the big employers who all are very happy to rent out, you know, restaurant spaces on the ground floor of their corporate office blocks. You know, though they should now be thinking, look, how are we going to get our parents back into work? You know, and allowing parents that flexibility of maybe, you know, being in the office based 2 days a week, but their childcare is there on site for them to enable them to do that. So my mission before I retire will be to have a couple of those open, keep expanding in our schools, because I like that. You know, it gives school-age children somewhere safe to be, and it's good because we're paying back into the children's education in their own schools. But I really think we could do something to change the corporate vision of childcare and getting that work-life balance right for parents.
Brilliant. No, I hope you succeed in that, 'cause I think that would be a good thing. And I know from when I was growing up, my mum would have brought us in to work with us. They weren't in the office that long, but I remember sitting in the wee waiting area, reading the book or whatever. So I think it's that would be great. I think it would also be good for people then to go, well, I can go back to work. I'm not going to have to worry about their son or daughter. Then, what would be one of the biggest lessons you've learned, or the biggest piece of advice that you've learned, or you would give to somebody?
That's a huge question. I would say that not to be afraid to take the leap. We talked about this actually with Gary last year, you know, and I talked about, you know, my time when I worked in insolvency, and I really worked seeing, unfortunately, sometimes it wasn't through misfortune. Sometimes people went and they made very risky decisions. But, you know, anytime you fall down or anytime you think you come to crossroads in life, get back up again and go and follow what you want to do. You know, just because you maybe studied like me at university, if you were 27 and you had a real career focus, you know, not to be afraid to take the leap. If you can make a difference, you know, and I certainly don't regret doing it. And I would always say to my boys who are at that stage as well, you know, my eldest son studied law and wasn't inspired by it, and I'm going, do not put yourself in a lifelong career. If you aren't inspired by it now at university, you're not going to want to do it. And he's doing a master's now in entrepreneurial management, and he is just loving it. I can see the ideas bouncing off him. I know that he is meant to be in business, and he will be an entrepreneur because that's his passion. And the same as my other son, he's just started university as well, and he really loves all the drama. One was sporty, and he loves drama and the arts. And he is as happy going to singing lessons, you know, as he is. And I'm going, follow that passion. Don't let that drop, because you don't have to fit in with society, you know. Just because other guys your age maybe think, you know, what's he doing up there doing musical theatre? You know, be prepared to follow your dream. And that's the one thing I would say to people. It's never too late.
No, definitely. That's good. How can people, if they want to go along to the TED Talk in January, will they be able to view that online, or can they still purchase tickets to go to that event?
Yeah, well, Gary will have all of it. I would say to anybody, follow Think Network anyway, because it's inspiring every day. But Gary will have all those links on the Think Network site. We're very hopeful that it's still going to be in person. It's going to be up at McGee. So we're very hopeful it'll be in person. If it doesn't go off in person, it'll probably be a virtual TED Talk. So follow Gary Doherty and Think Network. We'll have everything on our social media. So follow Sleepy Hollow Group on all the platforms, and we'll be sharing anything there. So yeah, if anybody wants to come along, the more the merrier. It'll be brilliant. A really good lineup actually.
Yeah, no, definitely. And with regards to obviously Sleepy Hollow, if there's somebody watching who maybe has children they want to put into take to Sleepy Hollow, how do they contact you, or how do they contact your nursery units?
Yeah, well, it's sleepyhollowgroup.com is our website. All of our branches are linked there. Our email address is info@sleepyhollowgroup.com. You know, our admin team are there. We are really active on all the social media platforms. We've just started a TikTok channel this week. So while we say that we're not involved in the children and the technology, we are sharing, you know, on those platforms for the parents, because we realise that was where the audience space is. So yeah, we're on all the social media, so follow us. Yeah.
And your book, is it available on Amazon, or
it's on Amazon. It's for really childminders, early years professionals, and it's a reflective journal, and it's to make you become a reflective practitioner, and really to to follow the children's leads. It's kind of writing down where you left off, where the children went off, and where you can take that learning from, and setting yourself 3 goals every day and evaluating what you've achieved and what you haven't achieved to make sure that you followed up the next day. So it's a bit like a journal, but it tells you a little bit about Reggio Emilia, and it tells you about the curiosity approach. We're also the first setting in Ireland to be curiosity approach accredited, and it tells you a little bit about our own pedagogy, Sleepy Hollow Group, with our own qualifications. So all of it's in that little book. So accountable and reflective journal for early years practitioners.
Excellent, Dan, and thank you again for coming on today. And I wish you a lot of luck with expanding Sleepy Hollow and your goal of bringing children into this town centres and hopefully revolutionise childcare as we know it. So good luck with that, and again, thank you for coming on.
No problem. Thanks very much for having me. All the best.